The next session. The next session is the first panel of the day is implementing not implementing low emission zones. It is on low emission zones and understanding the concepts. It will be moderated by Amit Bhatt, India Managing Director for ICCT. I would request Amit Bhatt to please come on the stage. I will also like to welcome our panelists, Shri Kranti Sambhav. He's the editor, OVERDRIVE Network 18 Media. Ms. Sonal Jain, Urban and Regional Development Advisor for GIZ. Shri Vivek Vaidyanathan, Principal Artha Global. And Srimati Aswathy Dilip, South Asia Director, Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Thank you. Over to you, Amit.
Thanks a lot, Vaibhav. So we'll start with the first technical session. And before we kickstart the conversation, I will request my colleague Murthy to make a brief background presentation that will set the context. And then we will bring in the panelists to kind of reflect and share their experiences. So Murthy, over to you for the background presentation.
Good morning, all. Okay, to start with, what is low emission zone? Low emission zone is a defined area within a city which has got a stricter emission policies or restrictions. And from transport perspective, the operation of internal combustion engine within this area is either forbidden or is subjected to a certain fees based on age, fuel, emissions, or regulations. And these low emission zones are actually implemented worldwide, mostly in global cities. And we will be seeing that in the next slide. The rationale of this is to sort of reduce traffic congestion, traffic-related injuries, fatalities, promote cleaner mode of transport, public transport, CO2 reduction, tailpipe emissions, and also to reduce health externalities due to air pollution. So this is a snippet of cities that are present globally that has implemented low emission zone. And Sweden is the first city to implement low emission zone in the year 1996. Europe alone has got 320 low emission zones, and it was implemented in the year 2022. And London, being one of the pioneers, has seen a 95% compliance rate when it comes to LEZ, which is ultra low emission zones, which is actually a stringent policy more compared to that of the actual low emission zone. So to just understand the concepts, I'll be taking an example of London here. The right hand side, you can see this image of London city. There are basically three divisions. One is in red, dark gray, and light gray. Initially, when the low emission zone was started or implemented in the year 2008, entire London was converted to low emission zone, which includes all the three areas. The first implementation that was carried out was majorly on heavy duty vehicles. That is, vehicles above 3.5 tons were restricted up to Euro 6, and whereas all the vehicles which are less than 5 tons were restricted to Euro 3. And after 10 years, this was sufficient improvement in air qualities, which we'll be discussing in the upcoming slide. Due to this, they actually made it much more stringent, transitioning low emission zone into ultra low emission zone. So the ultra low emission zone areas are the one in the red and one in the dark gray. So the stringent standards are, again, the restrictions are actually imposed on motorcycles. Again, for Euro 3 motorcycles, it's limited till Euro 3, and the petrol cars up to Euro 4 and diesel cars up to Euro 6. These are the only standards that are allowed to operate within this zone. And by August 2023, the entire city has now been converted into ultra low emission zones. And in case if any vehicle doesn't comply to this, there are penalty charges. The central zone, which you can see one in the red, commuter has to pay at least 15 pounds on daily basis in case they do not comply to the standards. And with the ultra low emission zone, as in all the areas other than the red, has to pay 12.5 pounds on daily basis if in case they don't comply to the standards. And these are some of the impact of low emission zone on air quality. You can see significant improvement has been reported by many cities on PM10, PM2.5 and NO2. To delve deeper, many cities have monitored marker pollutants, which are black carbon and organic carbon and diesel particles. This is basically to negate the influence of other sources. For example, black carbon, the only major sources of emissions are from biomass burning and fossil fuels. And when it comes to a city perspective, the fossil fuel burnings are mostly restricted to transportation emissions. So they have seen significant improvement, whereas when it comes to PM10, 2.5 and NO2, there are more than one sources, and there can be influence from major other tangible and intangible factors, which for some cities they have seen improvement in terms of PM10, and some cities they have not seen improvement in terms of particulate matters. Same in case of NO2. But most of the cities who has looked into black carbon and diesel particles have seen significant emissions, which directly shows that there is a significant improvement in the transportation emissions within that particular region. So this is a map, a bubble plot, which actually shows the India level or the cities in India's overall contribution or the share in terms of PM 2.5 load emanating from transportation emissions. You can see there are 131 non-attainment cities that has been recognized by Government of India. These cities do not comply to the particulate matter NACS limit as set by CPCB. And out of 131 cities, all the cities are mandatorily supposed to do something called a source apportionment study to identify their critical sources and then come out with a clean air action plan. And 20 odd cities have already conducted this extensive study called a source apportionment, out of which we have seen 66 to 64% of contributions varying across geography emanating from tailpipe emissions and are from transport emissions. And out of this PM emissions coming out of transport or the tailpipe, 90 to 95% is composed of PM 2.5, making it much more hazardous and injurious to health. In addition to this, the map also makes it very clear that India needs to focus on, very much focused on specific interventions, sector-specific interventions to come out with, to meet the air quality targets. In addition to that, this also shows the opportunities that are available to explore the potential of low emission zone across varying geographies to also meet the air quality targets as well as the GHG reduction targets. Thank you.
Thanks, Murthy, for setting the concept. I think what's really come out very interestingly is that the concept of low emission zone is really evolving, and we've seen that how cities in Europe and US are looking at proactively addressing this emission from transport sector and pushing to create low emission zones. So that's one part of the story. The second part of the story is that we have so many cities which have not attained the targets, and the source apportionment study shows that the contribution of particulate matter varies from anywhere between 6% to about 63, 64%, as it was mentioned. So there's two-part story. One, there's a global movement to address emission from transport, which is happening in the West. And then in India, we have cities which have not been able to address this emission from transport, which is predominantly the source of particulate matter emission. And then the conversation of LEZ is still not happening. So with this as a background, let me first bring Aswathy to share her insight. One, why is this concept, this movement, or so as to say, the conversation of low emission zone have still not started in Indian cities?
Thanks, Amit. So, I mean, I would say that if we could just step back, and I'd really like to use one of the cities that we're working in, Pimpri-Chinchwad, as an example. So I think, you know, ever since the NUTP has been adopted, cities have been taking steps to improve walking, cycling, public transport. We've seen that, you know, there have been 30,000 new buses that's come across the country. Over the last few years, there's metro that's coming up in sort of 15 cities across the country, and there's many more that's coming up right now. 26 states have adopted EV policies. Yet, what we are not seeing in detail is the fact that while congestion and pollution are increasing, and as we model into the future with urbanization increasing really highly, that our studies are showing that if things go as business as usual, this would increase like private vehicle use by as much as 8 times. Now, this is going to be catastrophic because like you showed in your study, transport does lead to a high level of PM 2.5 in our cities. However, we are still steps back, and we're still dealing with sustainable mobility, walking, cycling, public transport, electric mobility solutions. These are very, very important. We need to scale this up. But the low emission zone is a very catalytic tool that we have. So with low emission zones, we will now have the ability to prevent polluting vehicles while even catalyzing sustainable mobility further on as well. But I think because our cities are still looking at these issues, they're not moving ahead towards low emission zones. And also this whole concept of stopping the usage of certain types of vehicles are then becoming a bit of a mental block for our leaders to take this progressive and bold action. But now is the time. The next 2 decades where we are moving towards, like the Prime Minister says, the Amrit Kal, India at 100. It's time that we start bringing all of these solutions together and really sort of unlocking important tools like low emission zones to make sure that we're dealing with mobility in a very comprehensive manner.
Yeah, thanks, Aswathy. I think what's really interesting, and that's a very important point, that while cities are promoting walking and cycling, and we can argue whether the rate of promotion is good or bad, but they are promoting. But the big question is, how do you stop the gross polluting vehicle in the city? Because that restrictive measure it's a very difficult sell, and we all understand, and that's not happening. So on this, let me bring Sonal in. And Sonal, you've been with GIZ, and GIZ has also looked at this issue in some of the cities in India. What's your experience on this topic?
Hello everyone. Regarding the low emission zones, see, it's a new concept that is coming. But I'll speak on the air pollution side. So the low emission zones, they are seen as a potential solution for reducing air pollution in selected locations or zones in the cities. And currently in India, the presentation which they highlighted, like under the National Clean Air Program, they have identified 131 non-attainment cities where the pollution levels are high. And all those cities do have their city air action plans, which are being developed under 7 different thematic areas. So for the low emission zone, we can have, there's a potential to introduce the approach of creating these low emission zones in these non-attainment cities in a holistic way while covering various sectors. So it can be one of the reasons, one of the measures, like these measures maybe can be included, like the land use planning and management. One sector can be like that. Then the traffic and transportation measures, which we are already talking. Then the waste management solutions. Then uninterrupted power supplies. Then the plantation, landscaping, buffer zones, like in the morning, Amitabh Kant sir also mentioned, like having that carbon sinks. So we can have that. And prevention of biomass burnings. Because in India, it is not only the transport that is, while addressing that, we can have a low emission zone. We need to address it in a holistic way and with an integrated approach. So that would be my suggestion.
Absolutely. I think so transport is one, but we also have to look at some of the other kind of sources which pollute cities air. So that's an important point. So Vivek, one as a follow-up question was that you did also an interesting workshop a couple of months back on this topic. So one is that, are you seeing traction from cities in India on looking at LEZ as a potential solution to air pollution, or we are still, the concept has yet to evolve in India?
Thanks, Amit. So yeah, just to give context to what Amit was mentioning, Artha is, we are working with the with the government of Andhra Pradesh, with the Andhra Pollution Control Board, APPCB, as the nodal agency. And we've got some traction with two or three cities, which is Vizag, Vijayawada, and Guntur. And again, as Amit was saying, we had a similar workshop around 2-3 months ago where we had folks like yourselves come down. We had the Special Transport Commissioner, Government of Delhi. We had folks from Transport of London come down. It's not easy, And the moment you say low emission zone, there is, as Aswathy was mentioning and others were mentioning, that there is a resistance to stop the movement of vehicles. So what we did, and this is something which we realized because when we started having a conversation around a year ago, we also started using the word low emission zones. And then it was very clear that we were not getting traction. So we said, okay, let's kind of go back to the drawing board. And we said, okay, let's look at what is it that we want to do. We want to kind of reduce transport emissions. We want to ensure that everyone has a healthy, kind of way of life. So we just rechristened this as clean air zones. Now, the moment you start talking about clean air zones, it's, of course, LEZs is a significant component to that, but there are other interventions also. For instance, parking management, augmenting your public transport, looking at regulations, a whole bunch of things. So when you started having those kind of conversations, you got a lot more traction. And again, so Transport for London, which was mentioned earlier, is a partner, knowledge partner in this initiative, where we are working with them. And one very critical thing which was mentioned by the Chief Technical Officer who had come down to a workshop, Mr. Shashi Verma, he said that, look, at the end of the day, what worked for them was looking at low-hanging fruits. So they started, data showed that idling vehicles at schools caused a lot of local pollution, which affected kids negatively, around hospitals, around hospices. So you need to have those conversations, start looking at those low-hanging fruits. That's something which, when I spoke to the Guntur Commissioner, and I didn't expect her to, kind of say, I thought I'll meet some resistance. She said, yeah, okay, I'll give you 3 schools and why don't you start working with that? That kind of conversations work. So I think, and you got to build that narrative. So even having, getting different stakeholders. So, after that workshop which we had, we also had a 2-day workshop in Vijayawada, a very immersive workshop where we got the traffic police. And, of course, the traffic police is their hands-on, so initially you'll find a lot of resistance from them, the Traders Association, the RWAs. So it's not going to be easy, but I think it may sound trivial, but even kind of rechristening this as a healthy air zone, clean air zone, by looking at low-hanging fruits and then working your way up, makes quite a difference. And we are happy to say that, in year 2 of our program, we are now looking at piloting some of these initiatives. Of course, for a rank outsider like me, even understanding the methodology is proving to be quite something. But that's something which we'll work around with. Thanks.
Thanks, Vivek. And again, interesting to see at least there is a start of conversation happening in some cities. So, Kranti, you heard the background presentation, which was very technical. Yeah. You also heard 3 technical speakers put their point of view. But as a journalist who's been covering the automotive sector, and we know typically this, I don't know how much of it's true, but Indians, when they buy a vehicle, they largely rely on kitna deti hai, what's the mileage that I will get. Is emission also part of Indian consumer psyche? And if not, are you beginning to see it change, or we should not be worried, let consumer buy whatever they want to buy?
No, it's, thank you, Amit, and good morning, everyone. That's, I think, a bit outdated value, because whenever we talk about Indian customers, most of us look at them as a customer. Many, international players, they could not understand the psyche. For them, it was like too brutal. But Indian customers, they are not only looking at the value for money factor, they are basically looking at value. I think we had this discussion when there was one discussion on the electric vehicles, the adoption and everything. So at that time also, I remember what reaction from the customers which I see is, they are worried about emission, but not in the sense most of the environment or eco-friendly aspect of this discourse is. They are worried because most of them are buying their cars, maybe the first time, maybe second time, whatever, but they want to keep it for like 4-5 years, maybe some of them even talk about 10 years, but generally they don't do that. But reality is that they look at emission in a very practical sense. What if I buy a diesel vehicle and then after 5 years, 6 years, whatever, or maybe 2 years, there's some new legislation which comes. So they know what the minister had said, so they will say, okay, let it be. I will not go for diesel vehicle. Why will they go for EVs? Because they think that they'll calculate, they'll sit with the calculator, they'll say that, okay, this is the kind of money I'm spending on recharge, and monthly running is this, though most of them, So they, some of them are obviously, they are also EV enthusiasts, but most of them are basically calculating on a very practical basis. And that is the reason why we saw the diesel segment is all like almost 16, or maybe 80-90% now. Even when the government was saying that we will be doing, bringing some kind of legislation, before that only market or the customers had decided. Similarly, in the case of EVs also, many adoptions, what we see is in a very value-centric manner. So, for example, in Delhi, NCR, whatever the viewers or the readers who I communicate with, most of them, they say that what if this becomes illegal? Or, for example, whenever Delhi pollution goes up, we have those regulations. So they take those things in consideration. So to answer, like, in a nutshell, they do worry about the emission part, but not in the way, like, classical way of emission.
So maybe it's not the guiding criteria, but it may be an important criteria while selecting a vehicle. Will that be a right to frame that emission may not be the guiding criteria, but one of the...
Yes, yes. So I mean, when I say this, it's not only about Delhi, NCR or metro customers. So the thing is that this is maybe a prominent calculation in this area, but most of them are now, they understand the AQI, the cleanliness of these vehicles, and they also suffer because most of us, I mean, the decision makers, common car buyers are between 30 and 35 who are new parents. We are more worried about our kids. So that ways they're more worried about the emission level. So again, not in a very eco-warrior kind of sense, but very practical, very brutal value-centric customer. They look at emission norms as well.
And as a follow-up, Delhi has been seeing this implementation of GRAP, Grid Action Response Plan, based on the pollution level. So with GRAP coming in, are you seeing there's a change in mindset on what fuel, what type of vehicles people are buying, or you think that's not impacting the choice of vehicle which people are buying, at least in and around Delhi?
The major conversation which I have seen is around the NGT rule. So that was one of the biggest, I would say, game changer for whatever discourse we have seen in the auto market. Most of the customers, they look at the product and they see, and they say, or they feel, what if something of that sort comes? Something of that kind of regulation comes. So what will happen then? So that is the basic guiding criteria, and that is the reason we see the moment that kind of regulation comes. Last year, I think, whenever that used to, I mean, GRAP was implemented, at that time the discussion was kya karna hai, nahi karna, but now it was more or less seamless. So this year it was more natural, more, I mean, the whole communication was easier this time. So everyone was, contacting via WhatsApp, which this date, that date, you have to change the vehicle. For example, I mean, because there's too many complex things happening here. If you talk about the automotive segment, if you, for example, in 2 years or 1 or 2 years, your car is actually outdated because pre-2020, you had like BS4 and now BS6, and all of a sudden, even the expensive high-end luxury cars, if they're running on diesel, they're not allowed. So those kind of complex calculations have come into play, but they definitely look at, I mean, if we talk about the Delhi NCR areas, they definitely look at the kind of fuel they are going to, opt for.
Thanks. I think very interesting. And again, what we are seeing also as globally is that there is, at least in India, there's a phenomenal shift, at least in the way people are buying vehicles. And again, we had some discussion earlier, Kranti, that about 8-9 years back, the sub 5 lakh category car was almost a third of our sales. And now it's almost 0.3% of the sales. So there's a massive change in the way people are also buying vehicles in India. So on that, Aswathy, one follow-up question was, one is that you make the vehicles clean, which is shifting to zero emission. But then you also have cities where bulk of the 80-90% trips are happening through walking, cycling, and public transport. So how do we promote that as a part of low-emission zone strategy? And what's your take on the action happening at city level?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Amit, because like you showed in your presentation, the low-emission zones a lot of them are in Europe. Now, when we do bring them to India, we need to make sure that our low-emission zones are comprehensive when it comes to the solutions that we provide. We cannot stop or ban or restrict people from using private vehicles when we're not providing enough options as well. So cities at this point, they might have tested a few of these solutions. They've really not scaled it up. So as a part of the low emission plans that we do create for the cities, cities really need to look at how they will scale up their walking, cycling, really augment their public transportation. Also look at tools like parking management, how they would play an important part in low emission zone strategies as well. See how, just like the way Amitabh Khan so beautifully put it today in the morning, that low emission zone is not just one component. We really need to look at it holistically of how this can then be connected to high quality buses, metro rail, how can we bring the entire city and make it compact. And that's the whole compact cities electrified scenario that we really need to be thinking about. And that's what our future would be. But we need to start looking at this holistically, and we really need to start looking at it at scale. And this is what is happening in some of these cities, but like you showed, we have so many cities and so much more to be done as well. And it's great to see so many of us as partners sitting on this side and so many of them on that side as well. I guess together we have a lot of work to do in the next couple of decades.
Yes, so absolutely, and I think when we are partners sitting on this side, it includes you, Kranti, as well. I mean, so when you are talking to your kind of people who are listening to you, you can also bring in the low emission zone conversation as well. But on that, let me follow up with Sonal. Sonal, so one is that you promote walking, cycling, and public transport. One is what you do in the cities, but then a lot of urban infrastructure is yet to be built. So how do we bring in some of this concept in the early planning stage? Is there something that we can do and that you have been involved, especially in some of the cities, if you could share some examples?
So, yeah, Amit, to answer that, I will just say the Bhubaneswar, the city in Odisha, is the first one to have a concept also to establish a low emission zone. So they have it already. And from the GIZ side, through our triangular cooperation project, which was there in 2022, like between India, Mexico, and Germany. So they, during that phase, they actually came forward to have the first LEZ in Bhubaneswar. So they plan to have that established in the Lingaraj temple area. And when we talk about, like when we all are talking about this holistic approach or the integrated approach. So for this, like the idea is to concretize or to concentrate, like all the measures which we are planning at the different level, different areas in the cities, to have it in one particular hotspot, so that we can see a cumulative result of the actions which we are implementing. And it can achieve to showcase, like it is more impactful there. So that way it would be really helpful for the city also. So they came up with a concept. They also had the first stakeholder consultation with all the key stakeholders who are on the implementation side, like the municipal corporations and all the different departments, and also the most important, the residential welfare associations. Because if they are not on board, it would be really difficult for us to implement that. And I'm happy to share that the concept was well accepted there, and further it was also presented to the Chief Secretary of the state. And he also appreciated that, and that has been moved forward for the next round of implementation. So that is being where the first, the LEZ which we envisioning is happened already. So that is where we all should work together, how we can have these low emission zones established, like in a particular hotspot also. And when we mentioned like all these 131 cities which we have, so all these cities under NCAP also have hotspots identified already. So to start up with that, we can see whether any of these hotspots that has been already identified have the potential to be converted into an LEZ or not. So we don't have to do any groundwork again. So that can be also the starting point in the concept.
So very interesting insight. One is that we start at a city level, or we pick a particular area in the city as a hotspot and then kind of look at converting that area into low emission zone. So Vivek, Is that something that also came in your conversation, that should we start at a city level? Should we look at a particular hotspot and then build up the consensus from there? What's come out in your consultation?
So from our consultations, a couple of things have come out. One is, as was mentioned, you already have a source apportionment study. There are areas which have been identified. The science clearly points out that these are emission. So one thing very important to do is to make sure if you're having a low emission zone or a clean air zone, and if you're targeting transport emissions, first the science should say that the emissions are on account of transport sector. Otherwise, you do a number of interventions, you find out it's from industries or C&D waste, then you're in a bit of trouble. So I think there's science which says that okay, these are emission hotspots. So in our conversations with Vijayawada, they have given us a list of 12 locations. With Vizag, they have given us a list of 6 locations. So the way to go about it is, again, of course, use official data to start to make sure that that there is evidence which says that this is a problematic area on account of transport emissions. And of course, you're never going to, as Amitabh Khan sir said, and others said, that you're never going to be 100% sure that it is going to have an impact in the short run. So it's important to create a blueprint in terms of your short-term actions, your medium-term actions, and long-term actions. And you can start off with short-term actions saying, okay, let's have certain pathways designed, what we can realistically hope to achieve if we have these interventions at a certain location, and then expand it as we go along. So I think that's the conversation which we have been having with our partners, with the urban local body over there. And it has been very realistic, saying that don't expect any magic bullet. When I was talking to one of the representatives over there, they said that there's some algae technology which absorbs a lot of pollution, this, that. So I had to kind of stop them there, saying that I'm sure there is, but we just need to look at basics in terms of what can be realistically achieved. I'm sure that is there, and we'll certainly consider it, but setting realistic expectations, starting off small, but having that roadmap, saying in the short term, medium term, long term, what can be achieved, and getting that buy-in, as you were saying. So I think that is key. So that's the approach which we have. And of course, ensuring that it is in line with CPCB guidelines, which is very, your 2 by 2 square kilometer, this thing, linking it with your existing scheme. So for instance, Andhra has a Swachh Andhra Corporation. We are seeing if we can look at road dust, through some of their machines. So if you're looking at institutionalizing this, you will get far more buy-in if you're not seen as competing with them, but looking at adding to what the existing initiatives are. And with any government, that is, you have to add to the existing initiatives. If you're seen as competition, you may come in, your funding will be for 3 years, you might go, but then after that, it'll just die a natural death. So I think that collaboration is key over here.
Thanks a lot. I think collaboration is an interesting point. And again, we'll have to look at how do we bring multiple stakeholders together. And Mr. Khan mentioned that when you have so many agencies responsible for transport, who takes lead is a question mark. So Kranti, on this, one question which I had was that when these restrictive measures come in, right? So one is that you do a lot of good stuff, which I don't think people will resent. But once you bring in this restriction, so one question is, do customers really understand what is coming out from transport? Or still, so when you have this smog in Delhi, there's a lot of debate. And one debate, how much transport contributes? Is that a settled question, or do you think there's still not enough data? Or you still get a lot of requests ki, parali jal rahi hai, so why are you talking about transport?
I think you know better than anyone else that the research or the end, whatever conclusive results on the emission norm, because the report you were discussing, that also gives you a very different kind of scenario. But in reality also, what happens that whenever we look at the urban debate, the whole conversation goes haywire because it becomes political, B, it becomes blame game, And three, what I have also seen in most of our, because so many, as Mr. Kant was also mentioning, I totally agree with him. When we were used to, we used to cover all the different transportation problems of Delhi. Thing is that we used to go for different, like, I don't even remember how many sound bites I had to, try for, so that I have a conclusive, when everyone, everyone is represented in that. So in this scenario, the research or the conclusive evidence of what is causing more pollution and what is not, that is one issue. And second issue, which I have also seen, and I'm sure you must be working on that also, whenever this kind of change happens, whenever a new kind of policy or new kind of measure is being discussed, it starts keeping the car owner, car driver at the center of the whole conversation. And then what happens that most of the, then we don't look at the public transportation, because I don't know about right now what's the scene like, but I remember from last 10 years, the number of DTC buses haven't like grown. I'm not, maybe I'm incorrect, but that's the scene I've seen. So thing is that if we don't keep the real stakeholder in focus, then the whole conversation is anyway haywire. So that happens when I see, so we need to work on the alternatives. If we are implementing something, if you give them an option, I don't think, in Delhi, you've seen during the Commonwealth Games, also the GRAP, whenever it happens, they comply. But they understand the story behind it, they understand the intent behind it, and then they comply also, and there's proper implementation also. But in the case of BRT, if you remember, what had happened, that it was like, maybe my analysis, maybe it can be very reductionist or something, but the research was old, and you somehow made the car guys a villain. And that, it doesn't work. We have to take everyone into consideration and start from bottoms up. Not from top down kind of this thing. That's what I feel.
So how do you kind of build that ecosystem and then bring in some restrictive measures? Is that what you are suggesting should be the way forward? Build the ecosystem and then bring in some of the restrictive measures that polluting vehicles are not allowed or restricted or whatever?
No, so I think first you explain it to them. First you explain it to them that you are going through, maybe for 6 months you will struggle, but this is what we are going to achieve. First is that. I feel that. Second thing, that don't make anybody villain. Everyone is a user. Everyone is a car guy. I'll talk about my scenario. Thing is that I talk about road safety, I talk about road transportation, and I also promote, so many people think that I promote vehicles. I don't promote. I want cars and motorcycles to be driven and ridden by people who really enjoy that. What happens right now, most of the cars or most of the vehicles are used by commuters, point A to point B, or emotional buyers who never had a vehicle. If you provide them proper last mile connectivity and metros and bus, why would they want to risk their life? I don't like. I myself, I used to, or I like to cycle. I don't cycle because I'm not sure if I'll be safe or not. So they will not. They would want to shift and if you give them the proper vision that this is what we are going to achieve, they will comply. So I think there won't be much. Obviously the habit thing will be a big factor, but they will comply, I feel.
Interesting that people will comply, and then we don't have to make villains out of the subsections. Everyone can be champion, and how do you then communicate the story in a positive manner that will take the conversation forward? So one last question before I open it up for audience is, so if you have to communicate the story, how do we position this LEZ concept? A quick reflection from the panelists, maybe let's start in the same order. Aswathy first.
I think Kranti made a very important point. I feel communication is critical. So we really need to tell the story in a way that everybody will be able to embrace it. So that's very, very important. Today, I think, there are a lot of social factors that now, as a society, we agree that maybe this is not the right thing to do. But with emissions, we're not there as yet. Children have conversations saying that, oh, why are you having meat? Like, it causes climate change. My children come back and say, no, we don't want to eat meat. But then that's not the conversation we're having, because that's not the way we are. So I think he's one of our biggest partners to make sure that the story does go to the public in the way that it must go. So communication is very, very critical in my point, and I do think that that's something. Also, one thing that I do want to highlight is that when we've started working, whether it is on walking, cycling, or public transportation, it's taken us a decade. Almost, when we started, we would keep saying that for 5 years, we just showed renderings, and there were not changes on the ground. Now is when we're seeing these changes. So with low emission zones, I do think there would be a bit of patience and perseverance that all of us will need as well. And like Vivek said, there are small changes that we would make, and then build the support for much larger change as well.
So what she just mentioned about the communication, so it's very important to communicate about the concept to the people, for whom we are envisioning this. Okay, and in addition to that, I would also like to highlight, it's not only with the solutions which we are implementing in that zone for the transport or for that will help. We also need to understand in India, it's not only that transport that is helping, because we also have a problem of the diesel generator sets which are there in that particular area, or the streets, they are not well paved. So there is also the road dust emissions. So, and the waste burning is also happening. So these also should be included. We should focus on the integrated approach for this holistic approach, so holistic effect. So that should be more focused on. So that would be my suggestion.
Sure.
3 key takeaways for me from our engagement with Andhra. One is comms, but positive comms. I went in with, again, this is a learning for me, saying, oh, there's a health, negative health impact. There's a study which shows that, people in Delhi suffer due to this. And they don't want to hear that. They said, yes, we know there's pollution, there's this thing. How can you create a positive communication environment? How will it enrich our lives? How are we, so whether we talk about health, productivity, whatever, it has to be a positive comms campaign. And now what that is, we'll have to figure that out. That's something I'm not an expert at. Behavioral change, very important to engage behavioral change. And all of this has to be at the outset. You can't have it towards the end saying, oh, we have done all this, now let's talk about behavioral change, let's talk about comms. Doesn't work. It has to be right, it has to be ingrained throughout your intervention. And I think a third aspect for me is capacitating ULBs. I think we all know that urban local bodies are not very well capacitated, therefore they don't necessarily understand a lot of, they also have a million other things to do. So you also need to simultaneously capacitate urban local bodies and ensure that they are, that they are empowered to take decisions. I think these are the 3 key takeaways for me. Thanks.
Thanks. Kranti?
Just one more point, the research and this thing we were talking about. So just focusing on the storytelling and the communication part, I also feel that we have to convey the actual story. So what has happened right now? So, I'm talking about the overall air quality, not the vehicular or, industrial pollution only. Overall air quality. So what happens that every time we see a story, the headline says, Delhi mein rehna 25 cigarette peene ke barabar hai. So the smoker will think, acha 5 kam kar leta hu, so it will compensate, whatever. But just imagine for the kid, the housewife, the the mazdoor or anybody else, they don't understand. Just because this is a good headline or catchy headline, this doesn't give you the picture of what exactly is the scenario. So there is a confusion. There's some huge confusion on the impact of air quality, air pollution on Delhi or overall India. So we need to have one proper, conclusive kind of evidence-based report on this thing, that this is what is going to happen, and this is the kind of impact we are going to see because of air pollution. Then I think the change in mindset will happen.
Perfect. So we'll now open up for audience to have a Q&A with the experts. There will be a mic coming close to you. So if you can raise your hand, the mic will come to you. Maybe we'll start with... Yeah, we'll come to you, sir. There's a hand here first. Please go ahead.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, panelists. It's been a very, very informative session. And I'm Angi Shah, I'm from ITDP, and I have been working on low-emission mobility zones in Maharashtra since the past year. My question is to you, Vivek. You did mention a little bit on behavioral change and how to integrate that from the beginning. Could you elaborate a little bit on it? What kind of change in behavior are we talking about over here, and how exactly can this be integrated from the start Because our conversations, at least in the start from my experience, have been a lot with the ULB. So are you talking about having some kind of bottom-up campaign running parallelly as well, or how are you looking at this?
So to be honest, this is something which we are yet, kind of discovering as we go along. I think, you were at that workshop in November. So, so behavioral change aspects can be certain for me, I'm just going to give some anecdotal, I wouldn't say evidence, but anecdotal stuff over here. That conversation which we had about school children at that workshop, saying that, okay, can we start looking at school districts as low emission zones, because for no fault of theirs, you have idling vehicles, school children are suffering, or in and around hospitals you have patients who are suffering. So that kind of set about an emotional trigger. And trust me, even a few days later, when we had an two-day immersive workshop, we had like 5 or 6 cities as part of that. This was an idea which was mentioned, and this actually caught the attention of a lot of the 5 cities or 4 or 5 cities over there. So what are those kind of emotional triggers which can start affecting changes? And your vulnerable communities. So it may have to be bottom up. It certainly has to, we need to have those conversations with some of these vulnerable communities, but you'll also need to have those conversations parallelly with those people who are making those decisions. So for me, that is one anecdotal, piece of evidence which comes to mind. To be very honest with you, we are kind of engaging the services of a behavioral change specialist, and I'll be more than happy to, kind of share those learnings as we go along. But it's very early for me also to kind of to say that yes, these are the 5 things which we need to do. But for me, that is that, that's thing about schools. And I know, because trust me, when I spoke to, I waited for, like typically to meet a civil servant, you have to wait for 5 or 6 hours. You waited for 5 or 6 hours. Then it went into a freewheeling conversation where I got an hour with the municipal commissioner. And when I told, can we think about school districts, this is impact shows this. And they were very clear that, we don't want London. London has its own this thing. But when he talked about school districts, somehow that, kind of thing. And I was told that, okay, well, we can work with 3 school districts right away. So, but to institutionalize that, I think that is that is where we need to, so it should not be left up to the, let's say, decision of certain individuals. Of course, it's, we need champions, but to use those triggers to institutionalize the process. I think that's key over here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It would be great to exchange notes once we have the insights from the behavioral specialist.
Sure.
Yes, these low emission zones basically can function only where, there low activity, business activity that is a lot more concentrated. But in Delhi, Noida, Gurgaon, the business activity and all these emissions are a lot more spread out. So how can you, basically pick up, these are the highest emission zones, for example, during Diwali or during even normal, business activity, we find that the PM 2.5, is quite high basically across the entire city. So basically, and secondly, even after that also, even if this policy is implemented, the drivers basically will reroute their journeys, according to their own convenience. So basically, that will further complicate the process. So basically, instead of going from A point to B point, they will, basically go through a triangle or something like that, especially logistics ones, basically, because they are a lot more cost sensitive, etc. So basically, these are
that's an important point, and we'll come to that. We'll take 1 or 2 questions more, and then we'll come.
I would like to remind all of you the introduction of CNG in Delhi.
Sir, I can't see you where you are sitting.
Yes,
please go ahead.
I am just recalling the introduction of the CNG in Delhi. When CNG was introduced, Delhi air was clean. As far as the transportation is concerned, I am very much confident the way the transportation types are being introduced, low emission zones will be created. But I am worried about the things for future. Are we taking into considerations that other development activities going into the zones? You see, after 2015, Delhi air quality has been decreased because of so-called parali and the other activities. Because air sets are always dynamic. So we have to, while developing a low emission zones or looking for a low emission zones, we have to look for a bigger area rather than a very localized area as far as the air side is concerned. My questions goes like that. Are we taking care of the other development activities in futures which are taking place besides the transports, developing the low emission zones?
Thank you, sir. Second question, yes. The gentleman, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, this is Mayank from CII. So basically, CII is working on 2 cities in India for low emission zones currently. So when we talk about low emission zones, we all have this case study from UK. So UK have this policy called National Low Emission Framework, which goes hand in hand with National Modeling Framework, which emphasize on how we can delineate low emissions technically. Like we all know that we require source apportionment study and emission inventory. But out of the 100+ cities in India, there are not very of the cities which have this source apportionment study done. So it obviously takes back India and these cities 2-3 steps back. So don't you think that we should have this national low emission framework for us? Because to set up low emission zones, we need to have air quality modeling plus transportation modeling hand in hand, which has been done in UK for the 5-10 years back. So now on the current phase, now they are going to implement that in several cities. So can we have that national low emission framework for India introduced, on what parameters it can be and how it can be developed with the NITI Aayog and ICCT?
Thank you. So we'll take the answer and we'll come back again. So on your question, national framework for low emission zone, it's a very technical question. And we have the moderator for the next session who is very technical, Anumita. She will take this question in the next session. So I'll pass it on to her to answer. But again, the next session does take about legal aspects on going about low emission zones. So this will be answered in the next session. On the first 2 questions, Kranti, one is an interesting point that should we start low emission zone at a sub-city level, which is easier to implement, but the impact may not be that big, or we look at a city level, which is very difficult to implement, but the impact will be better. And again, there's a BRT story also linked to it. So what's your take on this?
My only take, two points. It should, sorry, 2 points. One, you should have a case study to prove. So right now we are living in this 30-second, 10-second Instagram Reels world. So we should have a case study to prove. ये देखो ऐसे हुआ था, ये ऐसे किया था. People suffered for whatever 2 months, 3 months. So, and that could be a city or a hub. So I don't see because obviously this is a very complex and technical thing. But as a I would say a stakeholder who is watching it from a distance, observing it, and whatever case studies we have discussed in the past, I think whatever we can do. The example which we discussed, it started from somewhere. It could not you still had to leave the bus to go to the end station. We need point A to point B. The whole circle should be complete. That's what I feel. And it could be a hub, CP or maybe Lal Killa or that area where pedestrian that setting is there. Otherwise, it could be small city which is more industrial, more corporate, and those kind of area. But we should have something which has to communicate to the people that this was tried. People suffered for 2 months, 3 months, maybe 5 months, but eventually it worked. So we should look at this option that we can also do that.
Absolutely, interesting point. So where do we start? Create this narrative that it works. It's not only theory, it works. And then communicate that story to a larger audience that, look, if you're going to do this, maybe you'll suffer about 2-3 months, but these are potential benefits that you'll achieve. And the benefits could be better air quality, better health, all that positive story is the way forward. I saw a hand over there. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Arpan from CW. So basically my question is twofold. Number one, there are international experience that LEZ can also reduce congestion. So my question is to Vivek. So do you think this congestion-based narrative will improve the uptake of LEZ in Indian cities rather than being a simply air pollution narrative? And the second question is, so as we know, there will be a consensus among the different stakeholders to implement LEZ, and to have a impact of that LEZ, we need to have a long-term vision. And given the transiency in our current ecosystem, so how should we build? Because London has a advantage of having a TFP kind of thing, but here it is not in place. So what kind of pathway India should adopt to basically have a long-term implementation, a long-term vision for a city like, let's say, Delhi, let's say any other cities like Bangalore, Bhubaneswar. So how India should adopt or how India should plan the LEZs in Indian context?
Perfect. We'll take one or two and then we can answer. So congestion and LEZ and that pathway story around LEZ. Any other question? Yeah, please. Behind you.
Namaste, sir. Shri from Sushant University. So basically my question was, like the cities in India are not properly planned or like pre-planned. They have been developed in an organic manner. So, sir, like to implement the LEZs, so the major factor which we are watching in tier 2 cities, so the emissions from the two-wheelers which are been there. So, so while addressing the larger vehicles, so we miss out on the smaller vehicles which are high on volume, which is causing the emissions. So, sir, how do we address two-wheelers as a last mile network in the LEZ, sir?
Perfect. So, first question you want to answer, Vivek. And
sure. Thanks. So I think, in fact, thanks for bringing the point about congestion, because we should not miss out on the congestion this thing. By creating an LEZ, we should not say, and this is a thing which we have been telling throughout, that you should not say replace ICE vehicles with only electric vehicles. You also need a modal shift towards public transport, and that's a conversation which we have been having with Vijayawada, for instance. I'm just giving an example over here, because when I look at certain key roads over there, they still have diesel buses. They don't have a dedicated state transport. I mean, they have a state transport undertaking. They don't have a city transport undertaking. So one of the key, of course, those are very large decisions, not possibly in the control of your urban local body. But to me, that is a part of the discussion which needs to be had. How do you kind of change your modal shift while affecting in a LEZ? So as was rightly pointed out, you should not just create an LEZ and that that traffic moves elsewhere, and it's that pollution moves elsewhere. So your modal shift to more cleaner technologies, focusing on public transit, needs to be a central part of that component. And we have been screaming about that for the past donkey's years now. And this was something which again I don't like to say keep on giving the example of London, but again, Mr. Shashi Verma, who is the Chief Technical Officer, he said that, look, they actually improved, what was a triggering factor for them was, in improving air quality, was they really upgraded their public transport network. And that resulted, so they were not looking at air pollution, they were looking at augmenting public transport. So they augmented public transport significantly enough, and that to buses and so there are significant number of buses over there along with the subway and trains. So you focus on public transit and you will have a marked shift in your air quality. So that's something which we really, so thank you for actually bringing that up in terms of that congestion, because that's something which we need to keep at the center, the front and center of our conversation with regard to LEZ.
Aswathy, you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, so I just, a couple of questions which were there. So, for example, I think, one of the ones who asked the question was talking about PM 2.5 in Delhi just being the, like sort of exceeding limits across. But, for example, when we did a study in Pimpri-Chinchwad, even the Pimpri-Chinchwad city, if we looked at PM 2.5 levels based on reports from University of Washington, the entire grid was, the whole city, PM 2.5 levels were above. So it's not like, you'll have this one small place where we just need to do some small action. But the truth is that in many of our cities, the entire city itself might actually breach PM 2.5. And just like the way, our speakers have been talking about, so the way we went about identifying the location was to look at zones where the PM 2.5 levels are much higher, population is much higher, but also where all of this right action is concentrated. So where are the walking and cycling interventions happening? Where are the electric buses? So PCMC, for example, is getting a lot of electric buses. They have a full network of walking and cycling planned as a part of their Harit Setu plan. They have an EV readiness plan that is in the process. They have a metro rail that's coming up. They have the BRT system that they are strengthening. So we were looking at where is all of this happening so that the LEMZ can be a layer on top of all of this great work, and over a period of time then expand it slowly and slowly to the entire city as well. And also keeping an eye on which are the vehicles that are really sort of causing the pollution, coming to the question also about two-wheelers, for example. So looking at what, like, you know, we've been talking about BS6, BS4, all of these, we noticed that there's a lot of older vehicles as well, vehicles which are more than 10 years of age. So how do we make sure that we take these steps to slowly transition them? And this is not a sort of a 1 year, you know, it's a long-term piece as we are speaking. And to the question about changing of, you know, bureaucrats, that's something that we all face. Often, you know, we hear people saying that, oh, in my last 2 years, we met 4, you know, managing directors change. That is the reality of Indian scenario. But it's also good for us to invest in local partners as well as invest in building capacity of the engineering core, because they might stay and they then become your champions for change within the system, and your citizen groups can become the champions from outside the system, making sure that this continues in the longer run as well.
Thanks, Aswathy. Kranti, this two-wheeler question, because they were exempted from odd even, they were also exempted from Grab, and there was 75% of the vehicle is two-wheeler. How do we address the two-wheeler question?
Same thing. I mean, you, again, coming back to the same point, they are commuters. They, you know, 100cc, 125cc bikes are not for enthusiasts. They don't enjoy it. You don't ride it to enjoy. So that they are commuters. Just strengthen the, you know, the public transportation system. Increase the number of buses. Increase, you know, feeder buses or vans, and use metros. Combine everything. So make it like what Mr. Kant was also mentioning. We have to make one grade of this thing so that we know from, you know, just like the Google map, it shows that, okay, this time this bus will come and I'll reach. So even people who, like, for people, like, you know, even professionals who are not, like, who are using their own cars, that will help them as well. So it's I mean, point is that we need to get commuters out of, you know, the whole road network. They can use the public transport. Only thing is that we need to work on that. Otherwise, it is not going to be, at the end of the day, it is convenient and efficient. So unless we, you know, strengthen the public transportation system, this is not going to be solved.
Absolutely. So I think the main takeaway is, one, we can have the LEZ conversation, but the LEZ conversation cannot happen in isolation. We have to give an alternative, and the alternative is walking, cycling, and public transport. So that's one important takeaway which I got. Second, we don't have to create villains. I think we have to treat stakeholders as equals. And then we have to spin a positive story on LEZ. And third takeaway was, which was very interesting, if you want to do LEZ, is there a legal backing? Is there a framework which can allow us to implement things that we want? And I think that is an important takeaway which I also got. And that will come in the next session as well. So with this, I'll wrap up the first session, and I request you to give a big round of applause to all the panelists. Great start to the conversation. And I will request my fellow panelists to come forward for a group photograph, and I will hand it over to Vaibhav to take the next session forward.
Thanks, Amit. While the group photos happen, may I please request Bharat to place the next session tents.